questions. People have lots of questions about so many things. And when they slow down in their lives enough to think about really big questions, they're often perplexed. Big questions like, why am I here? And what am I doing? And perhaps the really big becomes a theological question is there a God? Is God real? Is he really out there? Short answer to the question is yes, absolutely, there is a God. He is very real. And in fact, many people in the church or people of faith don't even think about the question anymore. They simply take it for granted. They know there is a God. They know he is there. They know he's real. For the church, it's really not a question that gets argued about or thought about very much. God simply is. One scholar has said there's nothing so proper for God as for him to simply be. And even the name that is given to us for God in the Old Testament, Yahweh, means I am. God just is. But for a lot of people, that's not good enough. They want to know if there's any evidence, is there any proof, is there any way we can really prove that God is there, and they want some sort of tangible, epistemological, something that can be measured sort of proof for God's existence. Well, in fact, there is a great deal of proof for God's existence. In fact, I would say there is plenty of proof for God's existence. One scholar, Thomas Oden, has listed 18 different arguments or proofs for God's existence. 18 of them. They categorize into 5 different categories. There's the teleological argument, the cosmological argument, the anthropological argument, the moral aesthetic argument, and then the ontological argument. Now, all that sounds like a lot of heavy-duty language, and philosophers have cooked up most of it because it sounds rather erudite and rather sophisticated, but it's not as hard as it sounds. You've thought about these things yourself, most likely. For example, the teleological argument, all that means is that things have a purpose or a goal or a destination. You think about the little creek, the river running behind me here. It's going somewhere. It's got a destination. This particular one has a destination of the Mississippi River and then the Gulf of Mexico. There's a purpose. And even wider than that, there's the whole hydrologic or water cycle. Things have a purpose. There's a reason. There's a design for how things are. And many scholars have said the design has not just happened. There's a designer behind the design. The classic illustration is, suppose you're walking through the woods and you come upon a watch, and you pick up that watch and you realize it's very intricately made and wonderfully made. Your assumption would be, this didn't just happen. It didn't just appear out of nowhere. It came from somewhere. Somebody made this watch. There is a watchmaker behind the watch. That's essentially the teleological argument. One of those arguments that there is a design or a purpose. Another one of the great arguments is the cosmological argument. You just look around at the world. Probably you've had the experience, one of those starry nights when you're outside looking up at all the stars and you're just astounded by all the spots of light up there, and you realize around the stars are planets and worlds. You think, who put all this together? Who made it? Or if you study the intricacies of the cell or even the atom, it's even more astounding. Who put this all together? And we come to the conclusion, these things didn't just happen. Somebody is behind it all. The Greek philosophers reasoned that if there's something, something caused it, something caused that, something caused that, and you just keep working your way back. Young children do this. They ask the why question. Why this? Why? And it's been said you can reduce anybody to an absurd position by just asking why about 10 times. There's some truth to that, because ultimately we come to the problem of, where does it all begin? What's the first cause? And the Greek philosophers reason that that first cause is God, what Aristotle called the unmoved mover, something that begins it all, something that is the first place. That's the cosmological argument. The anthropological argument, I mentioned that one, works just like this. Simply the fact that people have built inside themselves a sense of something more, a sense of the divine being, which explains why in every culture, anywhere in the world, people have religion or a belief in God. It's universal, this sense of a God. And the argument goes, that came from somewhere. It's not just sort of happening, it's there because God himself exists, and that's why it's there. So there are then many arguments for God. In fact, I think it's true to say that probably there is more evidence for God's existence than there is against God's existence. And let me try to stress that by giving you one more argument. It's called the argument from congruity. The argument from congruity just means things kind of pull together. They're congruent. They work together. And it works this way. The argument from congruity says that whatever best explains distantly related facts is probably the right answer. So we have several distant facts. There's a world. Where'd it come from? The world seems to have a purpose. It functions together very well. There is a sense of God's existence that all cultures have, this kind of religious sense that people have. That's there. There is the fact that there is a moral sense in people. People in cultures all over the world have a sense of what's right and what's wrong, and they agree basically on those moral rights and wrongs, those rules. That again is one of these arguments for God's existence. Where does this come from, this moral sense, this sense of what is right and wrong, this moral argument? And so if you take all of these different things and you put them together and you say, what best explains the fact of man's morality, the fact of man's religious nature, the fact of the world's existence, the fact of the purpose in the world, the fact that things seem to kind of hang together, what best explains all these things? Well, the answer is God. God's simply there. He accounts for all of these different things better than any other explanation that anybody can think of. God is the answer for why things are here and for why things work the way they do. So we call this God's general revelation. In other words, God has revealed himself or made himself known just in the world around us. You take a look at nature, you take a look at yourself, you take a look at mankind, you take a look at cultures, and you can see God's hand in every part of it. God is there, God's behind it, and he becomes the very best explanation for why these things are and why these things work the way they do. That's the general revelation that God has given us. But that's not the only way God has made himself known. People sometimes say, you know, I would believe in God if he would just appear and show himself. If he would make himself known, if he was evident, I would believe in him. Well, he has. He has. God has made himself known. In history, he made himself known to the prophets. He made himself known to Moses. He made himself known to many of the, what we call patriarchs, these great men of history, these great men of Bible history. He's made himself known. And even more explicitly, God has made himself known in Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, the church teaches, is God in the flesh. God himself. God walking around among us. God with us. God making himself known. God telling us what's important. God telling us what we need to know. That's Jesus Christ. So has God given us evidence for belief in him? Yes. Lots of it. The world, general revelation around us, the specific revelation of words to the prophets, the dreams, the inspiration, the special revelation of Jesus Christ himself, who comes in the flesh, God there for us. God has made himself known. So why is it then that people resist this? Why is it that in the culture we live in today, it seems like to believe in God is, well, that's stupid. It's foolish. Nobody believes in God. Really smart people, people who have studied, they don't believe in God. That's the climate we live in. Well, there's a reason for that, I believe. Maybe you've heard the name of Aldous Huxley. Huxley lived at the beginning of the 20th century, wrote the book Brave New World. Some of you might know that from high school or college literature courses. And Huxley was no friend of theism. Theism, of course, simply means to believe in God. Huxley himself didn't want to believe in God, and he was rather honest about it. Huxley wrote in 1937, "We don't know because we don't want to know. It is our will that decides how and upon what subjects we shall use our intelligence. Those who detect no meaning in the world generally do so because, for one reason or another, it suits their books that the world should be meaningless." For Huxley, he had real motives for not wanting there to be a meaning in the world, not wanting there to be a God behind everything. He wanted to live the life he wanted to live by his choice. Sexual laxity, the ability to live without moral restraint. That was what Huxley wanted. He's quite honest about it. And even more pointed is what Thomas Nagel wrote more recently, 1997, in a work called The Last Word. He writes, "I'm talking about something much deeper, namely the fear of religion itself. I speak from experience, being strongly subject to this fear myself. I want atheism to be true, and am made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers. It isn't just that I don't believe in God and naturally hope that I'm right in my belief. It's that I hope that there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. Nagel doesn't want there to be a God. He's afraid that there might be a God. What's he afraid of? Well, he admits a little later on, he says there is right now in the world a cosmic authority problem. That's the issue. People don't want there to be a God, because if there's a God, well, then that God is the one who's created things, and that God has probably built into the universe a rule for how things are supposed to be, and I'm his creature. I'm now accountable. I'm on the spot to be living the way he wants me to live. There are rules that need to be followed. It's not a free-for-all anymore. That's what happens when there is a God. And so, quite honestly, atheism is very attractive because the alternative is rather unattractive. A God who holds me accountable. Huxley and Nagel, in rather unguarded moments, are quite honest about that. Life is easier if there isn't a God. But in another sense, life is not easier. So many questions remain unanswered. So many problems go unsolved because God is the only solution. It's rather ironic. In our world today, many people think that the height of knowledge is to ignore all the evidence for God, all that heavy philosophical talk. Don't be confused by that. Don't be bewildered by that. It's simply the fact that you look around the world and you say, there's a God. Anybody knows it. And in our world, we are led to believe that really smart people know better. But in our hearts, we know the reality. There's a God. And really foolish people deny that reality. In fact, the Bible itself says, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. That's the real fool, the one who denies the evidence that is thick around us in the world, the evidence that is specifically delivered to us in Christ. There is evidence. Only the fool ignores it and says, there is no God. So is God real? Is God really out there? Yes, absolutely. He is more real than the world around you. He's more real than anything you've ever experienced. God is the ultimate reality. God simply is.